All right. Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. This meeting is being conducted both in person here in Sacramento and via WebEx with the assistance of Solid. So my name is Katrina Salazar, CPA, and I'm the chair of the California Board of Accountancy's consideration of the CPA Experience Requirements Task Force, which we also refer to throughout this meeting as CERT. This is our first in-person meeting, and we are all excited to be here and appreciate those who are joining us remotely as well. So when I open up discussions for members' comments, I'm going to walk us through the process today because it is unique and new with this hybrid format. So when I do open up for discussions for member comments, I'm going to first ask if any California Board of Accountancy members would like to make any comments. So those are our committee members that are in the room. If so, then just please raise your hand or use the hand raise feature if you are on WebEx. Then please wait to speak until you're called upon. We'll go through the various locations in order. When we get to public comments, I will ask if any members of the public attending in person here in Sacramento would like to make a comment. And if that's the case, please step forward to the table in the back of the room and wait to be recognized. Once any comments from members of the public attending in Sacramento are received, then I will ask our Solid moderator to open the lines for any members of the public participating at our alternate notice location or via WebEx. There will be up to 5 minutes allotted for each individual that wishes to provide public comments in person or virtually. And so with that sort of background on how we will proceed, I thank everyone for their patience as we work through this new process. And I would like to turn the meeting over to Ms. Reed to take roll call so that we can establish a quorum. What will happen is when Ms. Reed calls your name, please unmute your microphone and state your name. And then as always, please remember to remute your microphone once you have completed what you have to verbalize. So with that, Ms. Reed, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Nancy Corrigan.
Nancy Corrigan.
Daniel Dustin.
Daniel Dustin.
Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines.
Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines.
Kathy Johnson.
Kathy Johnson.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Katrina Salazar.
Katrina Salazar.
David Centini.
David Centini.
And Rich Simitilian. Sorry, my apologies.
Rich Simitian.
Committee, thank you. And we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. I appreciate that. And before we move into things, I do just want to pause to acknowledge Ms. Johnson, who is participating via remote, and we will make sure that we are pausing for your input as well. So thank you for participating that way. And I would also like to welcome Ms. Luz Molina Lopez, who has graciously stepped forward for a vacancy, and we do appreciate her joining us today. So with that, we do have some routine housekeeping, and I would just like to remind everyone who is participating that the California Board of Accountancy's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring that only qualified licensees are practicing public accountancy in accordance with the established professional standards. This mission, as you may know, is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority for the Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests that are sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. So with that, I believe we are ready to move along into agenda item number 1 of the CERT meeting, and that is public comments for items that are not noticed on the agenda. So at that point, I will now open for public comments, and this is a great chance to test our process. Is there anybody at the Sacramento location that would like to comment? If so, please step up to the table and wait to be recognized. All right, thank you. So seeing none, I would like to ask our moderator online to please open it up for comment are those not at our Sacramento location.
This is the moderator. I'm opening up the Q&A feature. For those members, we'll start with the remote locations first. And we'll give the instructions also for the WebEx members. So for those members of the public joining us on WebEx, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer and hand raise features to facilitate public comment. When public comment is called, I will open the Q&A or question and answer feature, which you will hear me refer to as Q&A. And members of the public joining us on WebEx can click on the Q&A icon and indicate they would like to make a comment by inserting the word comment in the Q&A text box by clicking on the hand icon to raise and lower their hand, or those who have called in the meeting can dial *3 to raise and lower their hand. Each individual will be given permission to unmute their own microphone and will have 5 minutes to make their comments. I'll provide 30-second reminder when their allotted time is about to expire. At the conclusion of the 5 minutes, the individual's microphones will be muted and we will move on to the next member of the public who has a comment. So at this time, remote location at our Burlingame location, do we have any public comments? And that is, I'll check in with Kathy Johnson. Do we have any comments from the Burlingame location? I see you nodding and saying no. Okay. So on WebEx, I'm going to check. I have no request for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Please close the Q&A. All right. So with that, I believe we have closed the Q&A and we're able to move on to agenda item number 2, which is the approval of minutes of the March 30th, 2022 CERT Taskforce meeting. If any member would like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the March 30th CERT meeting, which includes some non-substantive edits that were noted after the materials were received, please do so by raising your hand and wait to be called upon. All right, we have one here in Sacramento. Ms. Corrigan?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Salazar. I make a motion to accept approve the minutes of the CERT committee meeting of March 30th, 2022.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to second? And I have a hand raised here, Ms. Farrell-Hines.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. We have a first and a second. Are there any questions from members? Let's start with the Sacramento location. If there are any questions, please raise your hand and wait to be called upon. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My question related to item 6 on the of the minutes, specifically to public comment description. There's a comment in there about, I guess the last sentence talks about lightening the licensure requirements. If those were the words that were used in public comment, I'm fine with that, but I don't recall that being the term used, and I just would question that terminology in the minutes, since I don't think that's what the committee was discussing.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Samidi, and I appreciate that question. Are there other questions? Before we respond, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and move through the other remote locations so we can get all the questions on the table, and then we'll answer them if that's appropriate. So moderator, can you please open for questions?
Yes. So I'm opening up the Q&A feature at this moment. The instructions are on the screen. Those on WebEx who would like to participate, please click on the Q&A icon, typically located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen, type comment, and send to all panelists. If you called in, you can also press *3 to raise your hand, or those who wish to raise their hand, simply click on the raised hand feature next to your name. So I'll go now to the Burlingame location. Ms. Kathy Johnson, any requests for public comment there?
None, thank you.
Thank you. And on WebEx, members of the public, if you wish to participate, simply enter comment and send to all panelists. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please, moderator. All right, with that, I believe it is closed. So we do have a first and a second and a question. What we will do about Mr. Centini's question about the appropriateness of the word choice in the item 6 paragraph related to the public comment is that staff will go back and review the minutes and just confirm that the words chosen here are reflective of the phrasing. And so I believe that we'll be able to resolve that and just double check it. So with that comment that pending the verification of the wording, I believe we can go ahead and move to a vote to approve the minutes with the verification of the wording. Do we need a friendly amendment for this to be checked?
It is preferred.
Okay, so we have a first from Ms. Corrigan, a second from Ms. Farrell-Hines. Nancy, would you accept that correction or that additional action?
Subject to that clarification, yes, thank you.
Subject to that clarification, we have a motion on the table to approve the minutes as written, subject to the clarification. Do you accept the second?
Yes.
All right, so do we need to go through and reopen all of the public comments again?
Public comment is always appreciated, but as there were no comments on the standard, I'd be willing to accept no further comments.
Beautiful, and I so appreciate the flexibility. Again, if you do have a comment, please, raise your hand, and our moderator continues to watch. So we do have a team making sure that we are not overlooking anyone. So with that, I believe questions and comments are closed. We have a motion on the floor, and I'd like to go ahead and turn this over, I believe, to Ms. Reed for roll call. Thank you.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Daniel Dustin?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines?
Yes.
Kathy Johnson?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes. Pardon me. Abstain. I wasn't present at the meeting.
All right. Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
David Centini?
Yes.
Rich Samidian?
Yes.
And
Right,
motion passed.
Thank you very much. In case you didn't hear that, the motion passes, so thank you very much. All right, so that moves us along in our agenda, and what I would like to do before we plow through the documents is I would like to just briefly pause, hopefully it's allowed, to thank the staff, specifically Michelle Center and Mr. Dominic Franzella, that have spent a lot of time pulling these materials together. We appreciate all of the work it took to make this packet happen, and it was very, very large. So thank you for all of the very enjoyable reading. So with that, we are at agenda item number 3, information regarding the purpose and goal of the consideration of the CERT materials for the May 22 meeting. So I turn this over to you.
Thank you, Chair Salazar. So the purpose of agenda item 3 is to provide CERT an opportunity related to the framework of the materials provided for the for this meeting today. At the last meeting in March, CERT members discussed a number of topics and raised various questions regarding the attest and general accounting experience requirement both as it related to California and nationally. And on the first page, we've highlighted, first and second page, we've highlighted these topics, but I'll note just a few. These included understanding the application review process for licensees applying with a test experience, including the role of the qualifications committee, how peer review ties into the licensure process, California disciplinary information, including information on out-of-state registered firms, how other states without a test experience requirement ensure appropriate safeguards, and whether other states are considering an increase, change, or elimination of an attest experience requirement. So as Chair Salazar noted at the inaugural meeting back in March, the primary question established for CERT by the CPA is highlighted on page 2 of your materials, is whether the present attest experience requirement necessary and sufficient to support the CPA mission to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with professional standards. So this question consists of two parts, the necessity and then the sufficiency. Necessity in this respect focuses on applicants seeking to have the authority to assign reports on attest engagements. Prior to addressing other issues regarding the attest experience requirement, CERT will need to focus on whether it will recommend the continuation of the attest experience requirement. And the materials you have before you today are designed to help with that area, the necessity section. You will have an opportunity to determine if you are in a position to make a recommendation on the necessity of the attest experience requirement after consideration and discussion on the various topics, and is the point of discussion under CERT agenda item 11. So at this time, I'll turn it back over to Chair Salazar, and I'll do my best to answer any members' questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Franzella. Are there any questions or comments from the members? If so, please raise your hand and wait to be called upon. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and start in the Sacramento location. All right. Seeing none, I'd like to ask the online moderator to open it up for comments from members at our other location.
Yes. Checking in with Burlingame, Kathy Johnson. Any requests for public comment?
None, thank you.
Thank you.
And we're actually at comments from members right now.
Oh,
Not
sorry.
public. That's okay. Great. So hearing no comments from Ms. Johnson, thank you very much. I think at this point now, we are able to open it up for public comment. So I would like to do so first in our Sacramento location. Are there any public comments from members of the public that are in the room? Okay. Seeing none, I'd like to pass the baton back to our solid moderator to request public comments on agenda item number 3.
This is the moderator. I am reaching out to Burlingame. Any public comments?
No, there are no other members of the public in the room.
Thank you. I've opened up the Q&A feature in WebEx. The instructions are displayed on the screen. If members of the public who are logged on to WebEx, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon, typically the lower right corner of your WebEx screen. Click on the question mark and type comment and click send to all panelists. You can also raise your hand by clicking the hand symbol next to your name. Or for those who are calling in, you can raise your hand by pressing *3. I see no request for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. I do appreciate that. So that would I believe we are now moving along to agenda item number 4, which is information on prior Board of Accountancy committee and task force consideration of the experience requirement for licensure. So this is actually a written report only. However, we still go through comments from members. And so I'm going to switch up how we ask for comments from members. Rather than asking Sacramento and then WebEx members, we'll simply ask once. And so I see the head nodding. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And that might make it a little easier. And so we will be sure to keep an eye and acknowledge any comments you have. So with that, I would like to open it up for member comments in both Sacramento and via WebEx. Okay, we have one hand, which is Ms. Corrigan.
Thank you, Chair Salazar. I just want to clarify that CERT item 4 is a condensed summary of what was provided previously to the CERT committee members and posted for the public, I believe, as a part of our March meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe this particular item was synthesized or extrapolated out of attachment or Appendix 7 of some of the March materials in that larger item.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Franzella, for jumping in and assisting with that response. Are there any additional questions from members? Okay, we do have one question. Oh, this is fabulous. I can see the hand go up. I would like to ask our solid moderator to acknowledge Ms. Johnson, please.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes, hopefully I'm asking the right question in the right area, but as I was reading the document relating to the 2000 Sunset Review, in the first paragraph of that review, the first bullet point states that based on a study the CPA performed, only 13% of licensees indicated that auditing was their primary area of practice. Do we have an updated study? And if we do, is that percentage approximately the same, or how has it changed?
All right, well, thank you for that question. Mr. Franzella?
No, we don't have any new statistical information, and as it relates to that 13%, I don't even remember how that was. I wasn't here when that was put together, so I'm not really quite sure how they pulled that information either.
Well, thank you for that question. And when we get to the end, maybe keep that in mind. That could be an area that we talk about whether or not that would provide information later. So again, thank you. And we might want to keep that one top of mind and circle back when we get to the questions at the end. So that is helpful. I don't see any other hands up in Sacramento or online. So thank you very much for that input. I would now like to open this up for public comment, starting with the Sacramento location. Is there anybody that is interested in making a comment? If so, please step forward. And not seeing a mad rush to the presentation desk at the back of the room. We do not have any public comment here in Sacramento, so I'd like to turn it over to our solid moderator to please open it up. Ms. Johnson has indicated that there are no public members in Burlingame, and should that change, Ms. Johnson, would you please advise? Perfect. And so if the moderator could please open it up to public comment in WebEx.
Yes, the Q&A is now open. The instructions are displayed on the screen. If you would like to participate, click that question mark inside of the square, type comment, and send to all panelists. You can also raise your hand by clicking the hand symbol next to your name, or for those calling in, dial *3. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please close the Q&A feature. All right, with that, that concludes item number 4, which was a written report. Again, there's a lot of information in there, so it is worth mentioning that it is a summary. And so again, the materials that it's consolidating continue to remain available online for review and consideration. So moving along then to item number 5, that agenda is related to the February 2015 U.S. Supreme Court decision for the North Carolina State Board of Dental Examiners versus the Federal Trade Commission. So I would like to go ahead and address this and note that it is also a written report only, so we are not presenting it through the forum of this meeting. But I do want to make sure that we address questions and comments from members first. So do we have any questions and comments about this case? This is what we've referred to in prior meetings, I believe, as the North Carolina case. So we do use shorthand from time to time. The agenda does spell out the full legal name of the case. And I'm not seeing any, oh, I see one hand up, Ms. Corrigan.
If I'm recalling correctly, I think the question at the previous meeting was to consider whether this case impacts what we might do, and I suppose we wouldn't know that until we do something or arrive at a recommendation to the full board. So, you know, this is maybe something to just kind of keep in mind. I don't know that, you know, we can conclude anything at this point. Our board doesn't seem to have the situation that maybe that dental board or the group there had as far as number of, and I forget what the active market participants, which in our case would be CPAs. Our board is a little more balanced and actually tipped to already have public members to kind of keep that in check. But nevertheless, you know, litigation could affect something that we do. So, thank you.
I think that's an important comment made by Ms. Corrigan. So again, just because these are written reports, it doesn't mean that we will not necessarily refer back to them. And again, I think your comments that this is providing the context of the environment in which this task force is making a recommendation. So we will certainly probably consider any impact relative to this case once decisions are made. So I think that's a great point. I appreciate your summary and your highlighting it. And so that is, I believe at this point, the sum of our committee member comments. And I would now like to go ahead and ask the moderator to, wait, I apologize. We have to open it for public comment, but before we go to the moderator, Sacramento, do I have any public comment in the room in Sacramento? Okay, we're item number 5, and I do not see any public comments. So now I would like to turn it over to our friendly, solid moderator to open it up for public comment via WebEx.
Thank you. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are being displayed on the screen. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, type comment, and send to all panelists. You can also raise your hand by clicking the hand symbol next to your name or dialing *3 if you've called in. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, moderator, please close the Q&A. All right, well, thank you for that. So we are now moving along to agenda item number 6, and this will be presented. That concludes, I believe, our written reports. And this agenda item is the discussion and overview of initial licensing unit application review process for applicants seeking authority to sign reports on and test engagement. So we're also going to refer to the role of our qualifications committee in this agenda item as well. So with that, it will be presented by Mr. Lieberman and Qualifications Committee Chair, Mr. Michael Williams. And so I would like to welcome each of you to the table and ask you to please introduce yourselves and then proceed with your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Salazar. My name is Michael Lieberman. I am the initial licensing unit manager, and I'm joined by Mr. Michael Williams. He is the chair of our qualifications committee. Together this morning, we will be providing the task force members with an overview of the initial licensing unit's application review process, including the role of the QC when applicants are seeking the authority to sign reports on test engagements. Applicants for CPA licensure must meet the established qualifications, commonly referred to as the 3 E's: examination, education, and experience, prior to issuance of a license. Applicants who are seeking a test authority must demonstrate to the satisfaction of the CBA that they have completed a minimum of 500 hours in a test engagement to meet this requirement. The supervisor documenting an applicant's attest experience on the Certificate of Attest Experience form must opine as to whether the applicant understands various applicable professional standards related to attest services. If you turn to page 2 of this agenda item, the applicable professional standards that must be included in the applicant's supervised attest experience is outlined in sections 1 through 5. These sections correspond with the sections listed on the Certificate of Attest Experience form. When reviewing certificates of attest experience submitted to the CBA, initial licensing unit staff verify that the form is complete, the firm information is accurate, and the supervisor's license was active and in good standing for the duration of the experience. The applicant has completed 1 year of experience, including a minimum of 500 attest hours, and the supervisor has indicated the applicant has a satisfactory understanding of the qualifying experience in areas 1 through 5. Upon conclusion of the application review process, including the review of an applicant's examination, education, and experience, staff will determine whether the application is approved, deferred due to a deficiency in the application, or referred to the QC. Applications referred to the QC may require an employer or applicant to appear before the QC for various reasons, including the employer failed or refused to complete the Certificate of Attest Experience, there is a disagreement between the applicant and the licensed supervisor regarding the completed experience, an unduly short period of experience that results in an affirmatively completed Certificate of Attest Experience form, a familial relationship between the supervisor and applicant, signer of the form has made prior appearances before the QC that resulted in a deferral of an application. The CBA believes that the information on the attest experience form is false or incorrect. The applicant has completed their supervised experience outside of the United States. I will now pass this presentation over to Mr. Williams to provide more information relating to the role of the QC in the application review process.
Thank you, Mr. Lieberman. The purpose of the QC is to provide recommendations to the CPA to ensure that applicants meet the qualifications for CPA licensure. The QC acts as an advisory committee and assists the CPA in its licensure activities, primarily by conducting work paper reviews for applicants' experience and interviewing employers. The QC, not close enough. The QC is comprised of 13 California licensed CPAs in good standing, and appearances take place in subcommittee panels comprised of 2 QC members. Appearances may take up to 1 hour and may be conducted virtually or in person. The applicant and/or employer share audit work papers and answer QC members' questions regarding the experience form and audit work papers, including the role of the applicant. The CBA prepared a How to Have a Successful Appearance Before the Qualifications Committee flyer, which is available for the task force members to review in Attachment 6. This flyer is shared with applicants and employers and provides useful information about the QC and the process for appearances. There are 2 types of appearances, personal appearances and Section 69 reviews. Personal appearances are conducted with the applicant, usually as a result of out-of-state or foreign experience. During personal appearances, the QC focuses on interviewing the applicant to determine their understanding of the attested function, as well as their ability to understand the requirements of planning and conducting a financial audit or performing other attest services with minimal supervision. Section 69 reviews are conducted with the supervisor who signed off on the attest experience. The applicant may, and frequently does, attend Section 69 reviews as well. During Section 69 reviews, the QC focuses on the supervisor's understanding of the Certificate of Attest Experience and the associated opinions in the applicable professional standards sections, and the role of the applicant in performance of the work for the engagements. It's important to note that each appearance is based on the unique circumstances surrounding the reason for the QC referral and the audit work papers that are shared. After an appearance, the subcommittee panel completes an interview summary, which details its recommendation for licensure or deferral of the application and provides a summary sheet to staff. If the subcommittee panel is recommending deferral of the application, the summary sheet includes the reasons why the applicant does not satisfy the attest experience requirement. Staff considers the subcommittee's panel's recommendation for licensure or deferral of the application, makes the final determination, and informs the applicant. I will now pass this presentation over to Mr. Lieberman to provide more information relating to the licensing data found in this item.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Beginning on page 5 of this agenda item, licensing data is provided to the task force members regarding the applicants that requested a test authority over the past 4 years. Table 1 displays a breakdown by fiscal year of the 3,709 applications the CBA received requesting a test authority. If you turn to Table 2 on page 6, you will see that since July 1, 2018, nearly 80% of applicants appearing before the QC resulted in license conferral. Table 3 provides a comparison of personal appearances and Section 69 reviews. Approximately 87% of interviews conducted by the QC were Section 69 reviews. Table 4 on page 5 and 6 provides a breakdown of the reasons that applicants were referred to the QC. The majority of applicants are referred to the QC due to the period of experience appearing unduly short. I will now turn this item back over to Chair Salazar, and Mr. Williams and myself will be happy to answer any member questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. And a special thanks for our chair for coming here in person to help us understand the role of the QC. Often our board members and, of course, the CERT committee members don't have that insight. So I think it's really helpful what you've shared here today. So thank you for that. So I would now like to open for questions of the committee members on agenda item 6. Do we have any questions or comments? All right, Mr. Smidian, your hand is up.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Lieberman and Mr. Williams, for your presentation. It's probably more just clarification and being somewhat new. We're trying to understand the process as best I can. So just where you ended off, you provided us in Table 1 the number of applicants requiring a test authority. So of the total number of people who are applying for licensure, I'm going to say only 678 within the last, it looks like last fiscal year, 21-22, requesting a test certificate, a test experience. So that's not a subset of anything. That's the total number of people that we're addressing?
Correct. For this year, for this fiscal year, that's the total number so far.
And I would just suggest that number's lower, at least, than what I would intuitively think. And I don't know if other committee members have had a similar reaction or not, but I had some other questions, but Michelle.
Yeah, this is Michelle Sinner. I do want to also just point to the footnote that is referenced on the number there that clarifies for 21-22, that is a partial year. So I do want to make sure that everyone saw that footnote. Thank you.
Okay. But even looking back into the prior years, the numbers are, certainly not, well, I'll ask this question. In relation to the total number of applicants, I don't know if you have that number, but roughly what would that be? 5%, 10% of the total number of applications in a year? Seems like a large number of our people seeking certification, I presume, using the general experience as opposed to seeking the attest authority.
I would have to do the numbers to give you an exact percentage, but yes, the vast majority are the general experience versus the attest.
Okay. So this process exists for rough and tough 1,000 people, right? That's out there. Okay. And it seems like there's an enormous level of effort as it related to that. As it relates to the work, this might be addressed to Mr. Williams. As it relates to the work paper review, as I understand it, that would only take place, would be required if it's been referred to the qualifications committee. There isn't a requirement to review or provide any work paper documentation as part of the initial licensing application unless it's getting referred to the QC. committee, is that also?
I think I will defer to Michelle.
That is correct. Work papers are only reviewed as part of a QC referral.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. And Ms. Corrigan had her hand up next, but I do want to say these are great questions. We have members of the public. We have a stakeholder group. So there really are no bad questions, and the clarification is helpful. So thank you for the questions and also for the staff. So what I kind of noted is that we may, when we get to the end with questions we might have, there may be just a question about the relative portion of the test licenses. Maybe firm up a number later. Ms. Center?
We were able to firm up that percentage right now. So just to answer your question more specifically, Member Simidian, we estimate about a quarter of our applicants are requesting a test experience.
Okay, that is fantastic. That is Board of Accountancy at its finest right there. So thank you, staff. Well done. So with that, we had Ms. Corrigan. Do you have a question? We're not done with member questions, but moving along.
Yes, I did. And thank you both. The information is very helpful. Your presentations were excellent. So there is a minimum of 500 hours of test experience requirement for licensing. And of course, lots of hurdles have to be jumped. Certain areas have to be satisfied, planning, et cetera. There are a set of criteria that have to be met. And I don't want to place you in an awkward situation, but I know over time the QC has talked about whether the 500 hours is sufficient, whether it should be more. Has there been any discussion lately, or is it even appropriate for me to ask that question here? And what's the consensus? And if you don't have that answer and you can come back with the answer sometime, that's fine too, but I'm very curious about that. Thank you.
And then before there's an answer, I believe at this point, any input from the chair of the QC would be opinion. And so we welcome that opinion, but I think having a comment or an official position from the committee would be a different process. So please.
And I will defer to Michelle.
Michelle Center. So you are correct. We did not have a QC public meeting in between the last CERT meeting. So we have not had an opportunity to have that conversation with our QC, but we are happy to bring that to a future meeting and have that dialogue. I will say, since I have been here, which I started in 2020, the QC has not had a conversation about the sufficiency of the 500 hours.
Thank you very much. And there was a magic word in there, which was sufficiency. And so I do just want to acknowledge that, when we get to the end, we may be able to have the opportunity to come back and make a request to the QC to make a recommendation. But for the moment, although sufficiency is part of our question, I believe we are kind of starting with the issue of necessity. So again, I do want to remind folks we are looking at the necessity and sufficiency of the current 500-hour test experience requirement. So again, these are great questions. I appreciate it. And then I do want to jump back to Mr. Simidian's question and ask Ms. Bowers to add some additional clarifying comments about information that is currently available about our licensee population.
Thank you. If you go to our board meeting materials, not the CERT meeting materials, I'll give you reference to an agenda item, and it's item 8A, and that's our licensing division report. And in that report, we have, I'll just reference the page number, it's on page 4, and we do capture for our licensee population, our applications coming in, those that request general and those that request a test authority, and it goes back several fiscal years. So I just thought I would point that out if you want to look at that for any reference.
All right, fantastic, much appreciated. So I think we're nearing the end of our Sacramento conversation, and I have not seen any hand raised by Ms. Johnson, but I do just want to pause and make sure I'm not missing anything there. If we have any additional member comments. Okay. All right. So seeing that, I believe that concludes our member comments in all of our locations. And I'd like to now go ahead and open this up for public comment. So as before, we will start with the call for public comment in the Sacramento office. And I do want to pause and thank Mr. Lieberman and Chair Williams for their work in the presentation. Don't go too far. If there's a public comment, we may have a question for you, but we appreciate the shuffle that is going on here off screen with the seating assignments. Okay, so I am not seeing any public comment here in Sacramento. Again, we do not have any public participating from the Burlingame location. So I would now like to ask the moderator to please open for public comment online, and we are on agenda item 6. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen. Members of the public on WebEx, if you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, typically at the bottom right corner, and type comment in the text field and send it to all panelists. You can also raise your hand by clicking the hand symbol next to your name, or for those calling in, you can raise your hand by pressing *3. No hands have been raised, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, moderator, please close the Q&A. All right. So with that concludes agenda item number 6, and we can move forward with item number 7. So that is the discussion and overview of California's peer review requirement. And with that, I would like to acknowledge that we have Mr. Jeffrey DeLizer, CPA, who has joined us at the presentation table here in Sacramento. He is chair of the Peer Review Oversight Committee, so I'd like to welcome him and ask for him to begin his presentation when we're ready.
Thank you. My name again is Jeff DeLizer. I'm the chair of the Peer Review Oversight Committee, or PROC. We'll refer to it as PROC throughout this. I'm here today to provide you with an overview of California's peer review requirements, and I'll start by providing an overview of peer review itself, and then conclude the presentation with an overview of the PROC and its function. Since 2010, all California accounting firms, including sole proprietorships, providing accounting and auditing services, undergo a peer review once every 3 years as a condition of their license renewal. A peer review is a systematic review of a firm's accounting and auditing services performed by a peer reviewer who is unaffiliated with the firm to ensure that the work performed conforms to professional standards. The goal of peer review is to promote quality in the accounting and auditing services provided by accounting firms and to ensure that licensees are adhering to professional standards, thereby enhancing the products received by consumers. In order to undergo a peer review, accounting firms must be enrolled with a CPA-recognized peer review program provider. Presently, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, AICPA, is the only peer review program provider recognized by the CPA. The AICPA uses various administering entities nationally to administer that AICPA peer review program. The California Society of Certified Public Accountants administers that peer review program here in California. AICPA works with firms to ensure that peer reviews are completed in a timely manner and that review and acceptance of the peer review report. There are 2 types of peer reviews: system reviews and engagement reviews. Accounting firms who perform audits as their highest level of a test of service undergo a system review. The scope of a system review is to test the firm's system of quality control and to provide the peer reviewer with a reasonable assurance that the accounting firm's system of quality control is designed in accordance with professional standards and it's being complied to by the accounting personnel at the firm. Accounting firms that perform compilations or reviews as their highest level of attest service undergo an engagement review. During engagement reviews, peer reviewers look at cross-sections of the accounting firm's engagements and assess whether they are performed in conformity with the professional standards. Peer review reports are given 3 ratings: a rating of pass, pass with deficiencies, or substandard. The ratings vary slightly depending on whether they are given for a system review or an engagement review. And if you look at the bottom of page 2 and carrying on to page 3 in the materials, those definitions for peer review ratings for both system and engagement reviews are spelled out. Reporting requirements exist for both accounting firms and board-recognized peer review program provider, and includes peer review completion and rating and terminations from board-recognized peer review program provider. Accounting firms report peer review information, which includes their peer review rating, at the time of license renewal using the peer review reporting form, or PR1. Staff here at the CBA review the PR1, and any that reflect a substandard review are referred to the Enforcement Division for further consideration. Accounting firms that receive a substandard rating on their peer review are required to submit to the CPA within 45 days of acceptance of the peer review report, along with any materials, if available, documenting the completion of all prescribed remedial or corrective actions. Accounting firms that receive a peer review rating of pass or pass with deficiencies are required to provide similar information upon request by the CBA. Occasionally, accounting firms are terminated from a CBA-approved program, or peer review program, and are required to report those terminations to the CBA within 30 days and provide a reason for that termination. Included in CERT Item 7 in your information are 2 tables on pages 4 and 5. It's important to note that the national data included in these tables does not include California. California specific data is listed separately. Table 1, titled System Reviews, includes by year the number of substandard reviews and expressed as a percentage of total reviews in California as well as nationally. Table 2, titled Engagement Reviews, includes by year the number of substandard reviews and expressed by a percentage of total reviews in California as well as nationally. The legislature established the Peer Review Oversight Committee to assure the efficacy and standards of the peer review program. By providing this assurance, the PROC itself is a vital part of consumer protection role of the peer review program. The PROC acts as an advisory committee and assists the CBA in its review oversight activities and is charged with making recommendations to the CBA regarding policy and procedural matters relating to the oversight of the peer review program. This advisory committee has the following roles and responsibilities as defined by the CBA: to hold meetings as necessary in order to conduct business and report to the CBA regarding the effectiveness of the mandatory peer review program, ensure that the CBA recognized peer review program provider administers the peer reviews, evaluate any applications to become a board recognized peer review provider, and then provide and recommend approval or denial to the CBA. Refer to the CBA any CBA recognized peer review program providers that fail to respond to any information request. Collect and analyze statistical, monitoring, and reporting data from each CBA recognized peer review program provider on an annual basis. Prepare an annual report to the CBA regarding the results of its oversight, and evaluate the peer reviewer population. Each year, the PROC presents its annual report to the CBA. The report includes information on various activities and accomplishment, information on the oversight functions it performs, and various statistical information. The 2021 annual report was approved by the CBA at its March 2022 CBA meeting and is attached as an appendix to your information. At this time, I'll turn it back over to the chair, and I'll do my best to answer any members or public questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. DeLizer, for giving us that overview of the peer review or oversight committee or the PROC, as we more commonly call it. So with that, I'd like to ask if we have comments or questions from our members. And we do have a comment from Ms. Johnson, so I would like to ask our WebEx coordinator to elevate her to comment.
Kathy Johnson, proceed.
Thank you. And again, yes, thank you, Mr. DeLizer, for that information. I just, point of clarification, on the table 1 that lists the system reviews, and it has California separately from the national number, the 25 for 2020, is that representative of the total subpar peer reviews? Or is that the total peer reviews and 8% of those were subpar?
Just the total subpar.
Okay, and then another comment on that table, like in 2013, it was like 12% of the total peer reviews were subpar versus only 3% nationally. And it looks like we're back in line, we meaning California is back in line with the national percentages. Was there any discussion as to what the potential causes may have been why California actually ranks so high compared to the national rankings?
There's been a considerable amount of discussion. Dominic, do you have a comment to?
So going back to that particular date and time, and probably between 2010 to around 2013, that's when California phased in the firms to have mandatory peer review. Prior to that, it was optional, and firms participated. About 50% of the population had never gone through peer review before, so I think we saw increased failure rates over the first, or substandard rates over the first 3 to 4 years of the program, while those firms who had not been through peer review were becoming acclimated with the process, with the expectations of peer review. And so I think you had spikes, and now you're seeing more national average.
Okay, thank you, Dominic, for that, and that's very helpful. Can I have a follow-up question on that? So
Certainly.
It appears that nationally, the subpar percentages have actually increased. And so could we make an assumption that there are other states that may be included in that national number that, for the, first time that was causing the overall percentage to increase, or has there been a deeper dive into those numbers and percentage changes?
There's not an identifiable state or group of states that have come on board to reflect that. It's just reflective of kind of the transition of peer review, the complication of accounting standards. There are probably a really large number of variables that play into that increase.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for those questions. I think those are good things to highlight, that the trends change, and for us to consider that data in the report. So we have another hand up with Ms. Corrigan.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation, Mr. DeLizer. It's very informative. I guess I want to clarify. I believe when a firm first performs an engagement that qualifies them for peer review, they do it within the first 18 months, and then they're on a 3-year cycle after that. Is that still applicable?
That is correct.
So 18 months, so a year and a half after their first, whatever the real measuring criteria is, after the completion of that, then they're on a 3-year cycle. Thank you.
And thank you for that question, Ms. Corrigan. I think that highlights the initial public protection is actually implemented a little faster when firms first begin. So that's a nice item to highlight. So thank you very much for confirming that. Do we have any? Oh, we have Mr. Smidian.
Thank you for the presentation. So in context of what we're talking about with regard to the experience requirement, and I know further on in the presentation we'll talk about what other jurisdictions require or do not require, but and this may be an generalization, but it appears that our certification or requirements for those for performing a test services go beyond what some other jurisdictions require. but when we look at the peer review results, we're not markedly better, I guess, is sort of, and not to make this all about the peer review results here, but I guess is there some correlation that we can draw here with regard to how the peer review results, whether those are system reviews or engagement reviews, compared to the national level, where those other jurisdictions may not require for example, the 500 hours? I mean, intuitively, again, I would expect our results in California to be better, fewer substandard reviews. Not just people, just if we were to just look at this one particular issue, we don't see an improvement necessarily that we can prove statistically from the peer review. I know it's just one data point, but there isn't anything here from the peer review results which would indicate that the 500 hours is having an improvement over what other jurisdictions are experiencing. My question makes sense. That could be drawn, but you're like what you mentioned. That is just a single data point. You would also have to factor in, if you were going to draw a conclusion on those things, factor in the number of CPA firms in each state and which of those states have very similar requirements to California and which do not. And so there's a few other data points that would need to be factored in to draw a conclusion in that area.
Okay. All right. Ms. Corrigan, question?
Yes, and I guess just a further thought along those lines, because I wrestle with that. The experience requirement is an individual situation, a candidate applying for licensure. And a peer review, whether it be engagement or systems review, is kind of a firm review. And so they're two very different concepts. I mean, one could feed into the other, but not necessarily, I guess. I mean, a candidate could become licensed and go out and practice on their own, and there's a point where they could be subject to peer review, and then, maybe that's a one-on-one measurement, but it's a little bit tough in the context of a firm or a bigger firm and an individual's education and experience in qualifying for licensure. Thank you.
Okay. Well, and thank you for that comment. I don't think I heard a specific question to be addressed, and as I'm listening to the input and questions, I think actually this is really good, and maybe I have a clarifying question for Chair DeLyser. So please correct me if I'm wrong. As I'm processing the report, I'm seeing substandard rates, and I kind of look at their percentages, and I don't know that it necessarily is good to be zero. I want really good peer reviewers that are catching things. And I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, substandard rates can be a range of things. And I don't want to have anyone think this is just audit failures, that I think there's a whole range of things that peer reviewers look for that can, in a system review, can leave room for improvement and possibly give a substandard review. And so I guess my question is, can you, Chair DeLyser, comment on the range of things that might fall within a substandard review? And if it is not a failure, that might bring some additional context to, say, a percentage as well. So that was a poorly worded question. If you kind of get where I'm headed, help me out here.
It leaves me a lot of latitude for an answer then. A couple of things, and Ms. Center makes a good comment. What you don't see here in this statistic is the pass with deficiency rate. So I can't speak to exactly what it is because the data is not sitting here in front of us. But there is also a pass with deficiency, which does catch a lot of firms that are doing, fairly good work with some exceptions. And the correlation between that ratio and the amount of experience requirement could vary, from state to state and on the national average as well. And so it might be another data point to consider in your analysis. As far as the substandard rating, there are a variety of different things. In an engagement review, what can earn you a substandard rating is generally going to be presentation and disclosure issues. The peer reviewer is looking at the engagement. They are not looking at the system of quality control that's there. What they are trying to do is figure out, is an engagement performed in accordance with the standards? And so a variety of things. There can be kind of automatic failures where you just don't follow a key standard, and it's on a substantial number of the ones selected for peer review. If you don't get an engagement letter or something like that on a substantial number of them, those kinds of things that may not relate to the quality of the financial statements, but many of those engagement review substandards relate to the quality of the financial statements, the mastery of the accountant's understanding and presentation of the accounting and standards that govern presentation of financial statements. In a system review, it includes a much broader variety because they are looking at the system of quality control under that. And so that goes all the way down to, are your staff and partners in a firm getting the adequate amount of continuing professional education? Are they following those standards? Does the audit quality control document actually set up an effective system that would actually produce reliable results? And not just on this one audit you did a good job, but you've actually got a system in place that can repeat that at the same level of quality over and over again. And so there's a pretty broad range of things where you could have a deficiency or accumulate several deficiencies in a variety of areas that would rise to that passable deficiency or a substandard rating.
And thank you for that. The accumulation of smaller items, I think, is key. So that's great clarification. You did well with a non-question, and I'd like to call in Ms. Farrell-Hines.
Yeah, I've been looking at the PROC's report for 2021, and I just want to make sure that I'm interpreting the data that's in that report accurately regarding this, pass with deficiency. And for anyone's reference, it's attachment number 1. It's item number 7, attachment 1. And I'm looking at like pages 19 through, or 20, 19 through like 21 or 22. So there's a chart that says type of follow-up action after the statistics regarding the, pass with deficiency. I just want to make sure I'm looking at this correctly. If you're looking at what I'm thinking, I think I'm seeing is that there are firms that are getting this pass with deficiency rating after coming for review, and then there's follow-up action that they're being instructed to take in order to cure the deficiency so that they can receive a clean pass review. And so am I interpreting that data correctly, that that's what that is reporting?
That is correct. The concept that you're referring to is correct. That a firm that receives any rating can receive recommendations for elements of quality control to implement in their firm. Even if you receive a pass rating, you can receive a plan to implement corrective actions to various findings that didn't rise to the level of a deficiency or a substandard report. There can also be corrective actions. Those are immediate actions that a firm needs to take to cure a problem or a key defect in a report. If you have an audit out there that you didn't do enough work on it, the peer reviewer can recommend corrective action to cure that particular engagement as well. And so there's a pretty broad variety of different things that are required subsequent to a peer review.
If I may follow.
Please.
So then looking at this, we're trying to look at all this data and glean some trends and, as we're trying to determine next steps. And looking at this, like the largest types of follow-up actions, corrective actions that were, being recommended were submitting proof of continuing professional education taken. And then also the
team captain review of subsequent engagements with work papers. So it looks like the largest number of follow-up actions where these deficiencies were reported were really more so about technical aspects of following the rules of, submitting your documentation to, prove your attestation experience, rather than there being really substandard, quality, problems with quality. There were more problems with form rather than problems with the substance of the reviews. Am I interpreting this correctly?
In some extent, yes, but it can be. These both all speak to the quality of the firm's process, because a firm can receive an implementation plan after their to go and get continuing education because they had a quality defect. Continuing education is a pretty common recommendation, because both education on courses on how to apply a particular accounting standard, revenue recognition standard, could be addressed, or it could be education that's required on the overall practice of the audit engagement, say an employee benefit as an industry as a whole, understanding the quality control aspects of the audit from cradle to grave kind of thing on those engagements. Team captain review of subsequent engagement work papers is a more serious corrective or implementation plan, because what that means is we want you to, in this case, the administering entity is recommending that as an action because they want that peer reviewer to go back within a period of time, let that firm go and conduct a few more engagements, and then go back and take a look and see if they're still having the same problem. And so that one could be issued in conjunction with additional education, or it could be those two could be issued separately, for different situations.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you with that. And I think that clarifies that the proof of CPE, continuing professional education, isn't the compliance with the 80/20, the board standards. It's subsequent to the peer review and more educational and rehabilitative based upon the findings of where there may have been an issue that needed to be addressed.
Yes.
Ms. Frohline?
And I'm going into some of the nitpicky about this. I think this report is really helpful and important to us, having the discussion about the necessity and sufficiency standard that we as a committee have to meet, because, what I think this is showing is, this whole review process and, of the attestation experience of these applicants that are applying, this is where we figure out whether or not we're, sort of hitting those, objectives to catch problematic applicants and figuring out how to cure them. It's not being used as a barrier to licensing applicants with the attestation experience. It's being utilized as a gate to ensure that those applicants that are applying are approved and have met a certain agreed upon quality of experience to be able to receive this licensing. So, that's why I'm getting kind of into the weeds on this part. I think this is one of the most helpful pieces of material of information that we've received to help us, kind of dig into that question of necessity and sufficiency. So thank you for the report, for bringing the report back to us, because it had already been presented, but also for, the follow-up, information. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you for that. Do we have additional questions? And I appreciate the questions, the conversation. I think it's great. And there's a lot here. I mean, there's just a lot in these materials. There really is. So it cannot be understated how much staff has managed to give to us to try to grapple with. We thank you. All right, so I am not seeing any hands online from Ms. Johnson. Are you good there? All right. Well, I can see you. I'm sure I'm a little blur on your computer screen, but we appreciate you there. I see no more questions here in Sacramento from members. And so with that, that will conclude our questions and comments from members on item number 7, which is our peer review topic. So with that, I would like to now open it up for public comment. So as with before, we do have one seat open here in Sacramento. If we have any public comment in Sacramento, please come forward. And I am seeing no public comment here in Sacramento. I'd like to ask our solid moderator to please open it up for public comment via WebEx on agenda item number 7.
Yes, this is the moderator. I've opened up the Q&A on WebEx. Members of the public who are logged on to WebEx, if you would like to participate, the instructions are on the screen for your reference. Simply click on that question mark inside of a square, type comment, and send it to all panelists. Or if you prefer, you can raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon next to your name. Or for those calling in, you can press *3 to raise your hand. No hands have been raised and no requests have been submitted through the Q&A. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes. Moderator, please close the Q&A feature for us. And thank you, Mr. DeLizer. We are doing a little bit of housekeeping up here, so we're just going to pause for a moment in our agenda item. Don't go anywhere. Okay. And this will, of course, come to the full board. We are going to continue pausing. I was just going to say that the committee report will be presented to the board, and we will go through an additional round when it is on the board meeting agenda for public comment again and member comment with the full Board of Accountancy present. So I'm filling time a little bit while we do some sidebar work. All right, and I think we are good to move forward. So thank you, everyone, for that discussion on item number 7, which is our process. Thank you very much. And that one had a lot in it. So let's move on to the next one, which is item number 8, information regarding whether other states intend to make modifications to their existing experience requirements for CPA licensure. So with that, I would like to ask Chief Michelle Center to please begin your presentation when you're ready. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the task force members with information regarding the experience requirement for CPA licensure other jurisdictional licensing boards require to sign reports on a test engagement. At the last CERT meeting, staff provided the task force with information from select jurisdictions that had specific attest experience requirements or required beyond 1 year of accounting experience. Task force members requested that staff gather additional data related to whether those licensing boards, whether any licensing boards, are considering amending or removing the attest experience requirement for CPA licensure with the attest authority. Staff coordinated with NASBA to conduct a survey of all jurisdictional licensing boards. 26 responded to that survey. If you turn to page 2, table 1, it depicts the responses from those jurisdictions on whether they require a test experience as a condition of licensure. 4 of them did respond that they did. Specifically, one jurisdiction confirmed they do require a minimum of 1,000 hours of supervised attest experience. Another one specifically indicated that they require 2 years of experience for those responsible for supervising attest services and those who sign or authorize another to sign financial statements on behalf of the firm. On page 3 of this agenda item, Table 2 shows the answers from those survey respondents on whether they plan to modify the attest experience requirement for licensure. All of them indicated that they do not have plans to modify the attest experience requirement. Table 3 provides responses on whether they require distinct authority for firms that perform attest engagements. Approximately 30% of those who responded reported that their state or jurisdiction has a distinct authority for firms performing attest engagements. The majority of those indicated that firms must complete a peer review if performing attest services, and one jurisdiction indicated that they distinguished between firms with and without attest authority. I'll now turn this back over to Chair Salazar, and I'm happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sunner, for that presentation. Are there any questions or comments from members? And I already have a hand up, Ms. Melina Lopez.
Yes, thank you, Chair Salazar. Thank you, Ms. Center. I'm curious whether the responses that were received from the 26 states include responses from other states that are that have rather bigger populations, such as Texas and New York, I believe, are the other states that have the largest, beyond California, licensed CPA population.
Chair Salazar, I will get that answer momentarily. So if there's other questions, while we look that up, because I do have that information.
All right, so that is being verified. And we have, I would call on Mr. Dan Dustin.
Good morning, Ms. Center. And a quick question. It may not be relevant to your poll, but I'm just curious, in your research, are you aware of any other jurisdictions that have a versus G type licensing structure, or is it unique to California?
I'm not aware of any. I'm looking at Ms. Bowers.
I so apologize. I was sidebarring with the chair. Could you repeat that question?
I was curious. It may not be part of the poll that was conducted, but I'm curious if staff is aware of any other jurisdictions that follow a G and A type licensure structure where you actually, a Board of Accountancy actually issues two distinct license types.
I'm not aware of another state that issues 2 licenses, but there are differences in the other states in that some get a certificate issued and then go on to get the full license, but I don't think it's 2 separate licenses. And if Ms. Corrigan perhaps has more information.
I as well cannot remember specifically, but at our March meeting, I believe that's where it was, several of the other states, we were given information about other states that do have like a test type requirements, and it seems like there was maybe 1 or so. And again, I don't think it was like an A and a G like ours, but there was a definite distinction. So it's a limited, obviously, number of jurisdictions that do that.
Okay, Mr. Dustin, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Chair Salazar. I just want to clarify Ms. Bauer's statement about credential versus license, and I think it's beyond the scope of really CERT, and that's just that there are 6 or 7 jurisdictions that issue a certificate once somebody has the education requirement and passes the examination, and then they get a license once they have the experience. One jurisdiction does it a little different. You have the education and you have the experience, but you don't have to pass the license. But again, it's not similar to this, what we're speaking about here. But thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Ms. Center.
Thank you. Sorry, it took me a second to get the list of states. So we did have, Texas did respond to the survey as well as Ohio, but I believe you mentioned New York, and New York did not respond.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. So, I do, as I'm waiting for other hands to come up, I do have a question. I see that we have, a good response. 26, it looks like, have responded. Roughly 50% of the jurisdictions that might have responded. I think I would throw out, is this enough of a response to give us comfort with what other states are doing? And I don't know that there is an answer. It just begs the question of the status of the other roughly half of the jurisdictions that did not, were not able to respond, and New York being one of them, which we inquired about. So that's maybe more of just an observation. But I see, I believe, a hand with Ms. Luz Molina Lopez. Is that correct?
Yes. I am interested in perhaps a follow-up with the state of New York. If they do have a response, specifically, do they plan to undergo this same type of evaluation on a test experience requirements? If it's possible to request a follow-up from New York and, of course, a response, I think that information would be valuable.
All right. Well, I think that is noted, and I believe that that request has been made. I do believe this was a quick poll, and if I may be correct, that was done with facilitation of NASBA. So I do want to acknowledge with Mr. Dustin here that NASBA did play a role in helping us acquire this information. So that's been heard, and we'll leave it as an action item for staff to see if we can get any additional information. So I have two more questions. I saw Ms. Corrigan's hand up first, and then Mr. Simidian.
So just to follow up to that comment, is staff just following up with New York, or just kind of sending a second request to see what we get back? I mean, it is interesting to know what others do to kind of help us. Not that we have to do, not California doesn't have to follow anybody, but it is good to know and good to try to understand. So what are we requesting staff to do?
So I'm going to jump in and simply delegate to staff to evaluate what the options are, and then to advise me as chair if there are any questions between this and the next CERT meeting, so that we can maybe try to get a little bit more clarity. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. So, but thank you. I think that's a great point. And then Mr. Simidian, did you still have a question?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So to the extent this 84% holds true for the other jurisdictions outside the 26, that would mean, because of mobility, that CPAs from these other jurisdictions could come into our state and perform an engagement where they do not have the attest experience, but we're holding our CPAs to a different standard, even though they're conducting those engagements in the same jurisdiction. Or am I misunderstanding that?
So I think it's complicated. Yes and no. So Mr. Franzella, can you clarify, please?
Yes, a couple of things. I think the answer would actually be no. In as much as they would still have to, at some level, if called upon, be required to meet the 5095, which is our test experience requirement, to be able to perform those engagements. So they're basically, in essence, when they undertake that engagement, provided they're knowledgeable about the mobility requirements, they are, in essence, self-certifying that they meet the 500 hours as it relates to 5095 when they undertake that engagement. If they were called upon to demonstrate it and could not, then there would be violations of the mobility provisions in doing so. Additionally, while they could undertake the engagement, depending on the nature of the engagement, if it's and I think we talked about it in another paper later, at least it has a nexus to that paper. If they were doing it for a California headquartered entity, then there's a licensure requirement for the firm, the out-of-state firm, to be registered here. And again, any individuals who are performing services for that engagement would have to meet the minimum 500 hours.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think that's a really important question and thing to keep in mind, because this is where it starts to get a little complicated, because we are not alone, and we have CPAs coming in and leaving our state and practicing elsewhere. So I guess I'd like to to make sure that we touch on this concept repeatedly throughout this, because I think it is really important to kind of keep that top of mind, because we are looking at the necessity of the 500-hour attest. And there were some important words that Dominic said, which is it's a self-certification that they meet it. And I'm going to throw out a comment here, which is an anecdotal comment that I've heard from numerous licensees, and that is just that, CPAs who are signing attest reports have the experience. So I also think at some point we may want to just talk about the common body of knowledge and how our profession operates, right? Because CPA firms work and people work their way up, and it can take years before they're ever allowed to sign any attest opinion. So there's also some nuances there, sole proprietors versus firms, and how the structure plays in. So again, outside of the context of this agenda item, but it might be relevant for a future conversation as we consider just how CPAs operate. So I want to say thank you for that. We are at the member comment in Sacramento. I think that's winding up. I haven't seen any, and when I say Sacramento, Ms. Johnson, please raise your hand at any point in time. I'm trying to keep an eye on you, but I'm not seeing any comments from Ms. Johnson, who is joining us remotely. So looking around one last time, I think that concludes the member comment portion on item number 8. I would like to now open it up for public comment, first in Sacramento. Is there any member comments in Sacramento for item number 8? And seeing none, I would like to go ahead and ask our moderator to please open up for public comment via WebEx.
This is the moderator. The Q&A on WebEx is open. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, the instructions are on the screen. For your reference, simply click on the question mark inside of the square, typically located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen, and then type comment in the text field and send it to all panelists. If you prefer, you can raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon next to your name. And for those calling in, you can raise your hand by pressing *3. At this moment, I do not see any hands being raised or any requests submitted through the Q&A. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Thank you, moderator. Yes, please close the Q&A. And that concludes item number 8 of the CERT committee meeting. So at this point, I show on my device that it is 10:31. So I would like to recess this meeting for a 15-minute break, which would have us, now it's 10:32, which would have us returning in 15 minutes. I believe that would be 10:47. So we are going to pause and look forward to returning shortly. Thank you. Again. All right, so thank you, everyone. It was nice to see people able to socialize and talk about non-business items during the break. And so before we move along in the agenda, we do have just an administrative item to cover for those that are physically present in the Sacramento office. So I'd like to ask Ms. Bowers to make a brief announcement.
Absolutely, thank you. So when the CERT meeting concludes today, we'll be breaking for lunch, and then the CPC will convene at 1 o'clock. There is a cafe on the grounds outside, and they serve salads, sandwiches, etc. If you're interested in that, there should be a little menu by your where you're seated or on the back table, and you can text your order in and let them know, and when you go over, they'll have it ready for you, or you can just walk over and order. There's seating outside, and then there's also a tenant lounge on the second floor, and it has tables and couches and things, and you could eat your lunch in there as well.
All right. Well, thank you for that announcement. That is very helpful. And so with that, I thank everyone who is following us online for rejoining us. I see that Ms. Johnson is present online. So There's been no change in participants. We do not need to do another roll call. We continue to have a quorum after our break. And so we are now moving along to agenda item 9. And that is the discussion and overview of the consideration of the CPA Experience Requirements Task Force requested California Board of Accountancy enforcement statistics. So with that, I would like to acknowledge Mr. Franzella and Ms. Center and turn it back over to Mr. Franzella for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Salazar. So the purpose of this agenda item is to provide CERT information regarding CBA enforcement-related disciplinary information. So at your meeting in March, a request was made for staff to provide enforcement data related to attestation services and discipline related to out-of-state firms registered under the mobility provisions. So looking to page 2, members will note that since 2017, the CBA has disciplined 277 licensees for work related to attestation and compilation services or referrals from the SEC or PCAOB. And a breakdown of that is on table 1 on page 2. So first off, with the SEC and PCAOB actions, while there's been 117 actions, it likely is not all-inclusive related to attest functions, audit functions, but the vast majority of them are. Our system doesn't give us an opportunity to break down if it were something like insider trading or some other issue with the SEC, but the 117 would represent the vast majority would be some type of audit-related issue. As for the compilation and reviews, again, the board's definition of a test differs than, say, nationally, in that a test means audits, reviews, and prospective financial information. It doesn't include compilations. We've included the compilations here simply because our system that we use pairs up compilations and reviews under one heading, and we aren't able to break that down any further. So the next subsection of the materials, staff have provided examples of cases where a firm that's comprised solely of owners not authorized to sign reports on attest engagements. The first matter is a case outcome, while the second represents something that has been brought to our attention and which we are presently reviewing, or a couple of items, cases that are brought to our attention that we are reviewing. And moving on to page 3, staff have included 3 disciplinary outcomes related to cases where individuals performed attest services when they were not authorized to sign reports on attest engagements. So moving over to the practice privilege, mobility, out-of-state firm information, which you'll find on pages 4 through 6. California has maintained a no notice, no fee practice privilege program, commonly referred to as mobility, since July 1, 2013. This mobility program allows individuals who do not maintain a principal place of business in California and who have an active license and a valid and current status from another state to practice in California without obtaining a license, subject to certain conditions and limitations. The information related to this, again, is found on pages 4 through 6 of your material. While for individuals, mobility is generally a no-notice program, there are instances where individuals are required to submit a pre-notification to the board to obtain the authority to practice under mobility, and we have outlined these particular items on the bottom of page 4 and the top of page 5 of your materials. In addition to these types of pre-notifications, the CBA does receive consumer complaints regarding individuals exercising a practice privilege in California. So on page 5, table 2, this provides the number of individuals disciplined practicing under mobility, in addition to the types or areas of the discipline or services that were the reason for the discipline. Additionally, the CBA or the mobility statutes also require the CBA to routinely review the SEC and PCAOB websites to identify out-of-state licensees who may have disqualifying conditions or who may be obliged to cease practice as a result of an SEC or PCAOB administrative action. So after completing our review, the CBA then sends out letters to these out-of-state licensees informing them that prior to exercising a practice privilege in California, they must file a pre-notification form and receive approval from the CBA. So since the inception of the mobility program, the CBA has sent out just under 180 letters to out-of-state licensees stemming from our review of the SEC and PCAOB websites. So the last area I'll cover is related to the out-of-state firm registrations. Individuals that exercise a practice privilege and will perform certain public accounting services to California headquartered entities may only do so through a firm registered with the CBA. These services include an audit or review of a financial statement, a compilation of a financial statement, when it is expected or reasonably might be expected that a third party will use the financial statement and the compilation report does not disclose a lack of independence, an examination of prospective financial information. These firms would receive an out-of-state firm registration, commonly referred to as an OFR. And the CBA has taken action to deny or institute discipline against 6 OFRs, as we've noted on page 6 in Table 3. So at this time, I'll turn discussion back over to the chair, and I'll do my best to answer members' questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Franzella, for that presentation on item 9. So looking around the room here in Sacramento, do we have any member comments or questions? Or online from Burlingame? All right, not seeing any comments or questions for Mr. Franzella. Thank you for that report. I think it is now time to move along to public comments on agenda item number 9, which was just presented. And so I would like to ask if there are any public comments in the Sacramento meeting space. And seeing no one coming forward for public comments, I would like to ask our solid moderator online to please open up for public comment on item number 9 via WebEx.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open on WebEx. Members of the public who are participating via WebEx, if you would like to participate in public comment for this agenda item, click the question mark inside of the square, typically located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen, and type comment in the text field and send to all panelists. You can also raise your hand by clicking the hand icon next to your name, or those calling in can participate by clicking on the *3. I have no raised hands and no requests submitted through the Q&A. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Thank you, moderator. Yes, please close the Q&A. All right, so that concludes item number 9, and we are now moving to item number 10 in the agenda, which is information regarding the CBA's evaluation of the NASBA, or National Association of State Boards of Accountancy's guiding principles enforcement, including the CBA's determinations on state enforcement practices. With that, I would like to invite Mr. Franzella to begin his presentation.
Thank you again. So at your March meeting, CERT members inquired about how other states address enforcement and safeguards associated with not having an attest experience requirement. So in an effort to assist members in understanding other states' enforcement practices, staff are providing information on work the CBA undertook regarding substantial equivalency with respect to other states' enforcement programs, and which was necessitated by statutes that enacted California's mobility provisions. Over the course of several years, the CBA undertook a thorough review of other states' enforcement programs as part of this legislative mandate. The legislature required the CBA to convene a stakeholder group, which eventually became known as the Mobility Stakeholder Group, or MSG, to consider whether the new mobility program was consistent with the CBA's duty to protect the public. The legislature required that the CBA make various state-by-state determinations regarding allowing licensees from other states to exercise the practice privilege under the mobility program. the factors the CBA was required to use at a minimum as part of its determinations focused on enforcement and disciplinary disclosures. So the three items on the top of page 3 highlight the minimum factors the CBA was required to include. The legislature did provide an alternative to performing the determinations individually, which focused on evaluating states' enforcement practices against the national model of best practices that NASBA was required to develop and which needed to meet or exceed CBA's own enforcement practices. And on the middle of page 4, staff have highlighted the steps necessary to use the steps the legislature allowed for and required the CBA to use for this alternative method. So in December 2017, the CBA submitted to the legislature the California Mobility Program for Accountancy, Implementation, Enforcement, and its Consumer Benefits Report. Staff included a link to the CBA website where members could review a copy. To assist members in identifying the pertinent information regarding the CBA's evaluations of the state's enforcement programs, staff included and noted the topics and the associated page numbers for easier reference. And these are found at the bottom of page 3 of your materials. So after completing this multi-year project, the CBA determined that all states maintained practices substantially equivalent to NASBA's guiding principles of enforcement. Again, this was a multi-year heavy lift on behalf of the board and the MSG and actually NASBA as well. So again, after it was all concluded, the board had made determinations that those particular states had met NASBA's enforcement best practices and thereby were substantially equivalent for purposes of protecting the public from a mobility perspective. So at this time, I'd like to turn discussion back over to Chair Salazar, and I'll do my best to answer members' questions.
Thank you for that presentation. I think that's important to highlight, what you just wrapped up with, that it is substantial equivalency. And so it's focusing after initial licensure, it's for the enforcement side, again, which happens as the follow-up to the licensure. So I think this is very helpful. I am asking now for comments or questions from our participating committee members, whether you're online or in the building here in Sacramento. Okay, so I'm actually not seeing any comments or questions. So with that, we are still in agenda item 10, and I would like to open up for public comment, and we'll start that with the public comment taken in the Sacramento location. So at this point, if you're interested in commenting on item 10, please step forward. And seeing no requests to respond to the invitation for public comment, I would like to ask our solid moderator to please open up for public comment via WebEx, and we are still on agenda item 10. Thank you.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. Members of the public who are participating via WebEx, you can access it by clicking on the question mark inside of a square, typically located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. Type comment in the text field and send it to all panelists. You can also raise your hand by clicking the hand icon next to your name, or for those calling in, clicking the *3 to raise your hand. All the instructions are displayed on the screen for your reference. I do not see any hands being raised by members of the public or any requests coming through the Q&A. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. And then I have a point of order that might be a Ms. Bowers question, but if I thought of an additional question, may I ask it now? Of course. Okay, since we have not concluded item 10. Why, thank you. Thank you, Dominic, Mr. Franzella, for doing this. I mean, you're focusing us on substantial equivalency, and we've talked about an awful lot today. We've talked about pre-licensure, we've talked about post-licensure discipline. Would you compare the substantial equivalency concept of enforcement to the reciprocity concept? And that is not really new. It was something that was in our prior meeting materials, but I just think for clarification of this topic, it might just be helpful to remind folks that mobility is slightly different from reciprocity because, again, we're talking about highly detailed, complex things. So if that's appropriate, I'd love just a quick comment.
So I'll do my best to try to I believe I understood the question. Mobility, again, is an opportunity for a licensee to engage and provide services in California under some limited scopes or with certain limitations without ever obtaining a licensure. Whereas reciprocity, the board doesn't have true reciprocity, but has fairly close to a level of reciprocity whereby a licensee in another jurisdiction can meet the examination, experience, and education requirements of another state and receive a license in California based on that license in another state if certain conditions and requirements are met. There are additional requirements such as minimum amount of years licensed, 4 of 10, as well as needing to complete an ethics exam specific to California, needing to complete fingerprints. I believe those are the primary components, but it's not simply just having a license in another state, supplying the paperwork, and then just getting a license. There's a few extra hurdles, I guess, that are there.
And I appreciate that. Again, I just wanted to, as we're thinking about ways that CPAs from other jurisdictions might be able to enter California and perform services, that clarification is at least helpful to me. So I do appreciate that. And again, if you have detailed questions, you can refer back to prior materials for the specifics. So I appreciate the overview that Mr. Francella gave on the fly. And then also just because I sort of did a little compare and contrast a little bit late, I do want to just open up for public comment one more time and just make sure that our members, if they have any follow-up, are being addressed. And seeing none, I do have one from Mr. Smidian.
Just to build on your question, then in the case of reciprocity, are they then required to select that A and G at that point in time? And would that also be subject to one of the requirements they'd have to fulfill?
So yes, they need to designate if they're applying for general or a test. They are considered substantially equivalent if their state has issued them a license that provides them that authority to have a test. It is one of the, going back to maybe the March meeting, based on decisions from CERT and final recommendations and consideration by the board, one of the discussions really does relate to that particular policy because it's more of a policy and how it's interpreted under 5087. And that policy can change based on, any number of factors, including the board itself, the executive officer, and the like. So one of the things that staff is asking some clarification on at some particular point is if the attest experience is going to be maintained, how to ensure consistency going forward. 5087, which is the reciprocity statute, would be applicable, because in the past it was you could apply for general licensure with that level of just selecting, but a test would go through some form of completion of a certificate of attest experience form. That has since changed, but again, it's more flexible presently. So we're trying to get some clarity on that should the attest experience requirement be maintained.
Okay. Ms. Luz Molina, comment?
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Salazar. Can you please remind me, when did the state of California split up the licensure where general licenses were available?
Mr. Francella?
It was part of the board's 2000 sunset review. I believe the first licenses were issued in either 2002 or 2003 for the general experience.
And prior to that year, all licenses issued by California included the attest, were attest licenses.
Correct. Well, required individuals to to complete the attest experience. There wasn't an attest license per se. Everybody just had that authority.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that question and also the response. Any other member comments or questions? I think these are honing in on some of the complexities that that exist with different structures within different states and how things are applied. So I appreciate the staff's mention that pending recommendations and board action, of course, current policies will be reevaluated. So, all right, so I'm kind of buying time for additional questions, and I'm not seeing any more hands raised for the committee members. So I thank everyone for their comments and input. And I would like to move along again to public comment just to be thorough. So we're going to start here with Sacramento. If you are interested in public comment, please move forward to the table at the back of the room, and we will call upon you, or I will. Probably no one else, just me. All right, and not seeing anyone racing to make comment, I'm going to now ask our solid moderator to please open up for public comment via WebEx, and we are concluding agenda item 10.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Members of the public participating via WebEx, if you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, type comments, send to all panelists, or you can also raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon next to your name. For those calling in, you can press star. I do not see any hands raised or any requests via WebEx. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, moderator, please close the public comment. A little bit of feedback there. All right, so with that, our public comment is closed, and that concludes agenda item number 10. And we now move on to agenda item number 11, discussion regarding possible recommendations to the Board of Accountancy regarding experience required for CPA licensure. Mr. Franzella, the floor is yours.
Thank you again. So for this item, CERT is being asked to decide whether it wishes to provide an initial recommendation regarding the necessity component of the primary question regarding the attest experience requirement. Again, as was kind of highlighted back at agenda item 3, at your March meeting, members discussed various topics and raised various questions regarding the attest and general accounting experience, both in California and nationally. Those topics were highlighted under agenda item 3 and are noted here under agenda item 11 on pages 1 and 2. And again, as originally discussed under agenda item 3, the CBA established the primary question for CERT review. Again, is the present attest experience requirement necessary and sufficient to support the CBA mission to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with professional standards? So this agenda item gives CERT the opportunity to discuss an initial recommendation, if it feels it's in a position to do so, regarding the necessity, so the need to continue to require applicants to complete the attest experience requirement for those wanting to sign reports on attest engagements. Based on discussions from this meeting, staff will do one of the following: perform any additional research the CERT members believe is necessary to assist in answering the necessity portion of the primary question. Should CERT decide to recommend that the attest experience requirement is necessary, staff will then perform requested research for the next CERT meeting to discuss the sufficiency of the attest experience requirement, really looking at the 500 hours, the attest experience form, those areas of practice that are presently required. Or should CERT decide to recommend that the attest experience requirement is no longer necessary, staff will begin preparing materials excuse me, around a method to eliminate the attest experience requirement, including but not limited to what backstops would be put in place to offset the elimination of the attest experience requirement. So at this time, I'll turn discussion back over to Chair Salazar, and Michelle and I stand ready to answer members' questions as best we can.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Okay, this is where it gets interesting. This is agenda item 11, and before we move forward, I'm just going to repeat something. The question in front of us is the present attest experience requirement necessary and sufficient to support this board's mission to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice in accordance with established professional standards. And so again, I want to remind our committee members that our focus is on necessary. And so from that, that's really our focus. We've talked about things related to sufficiency, but for the next steps, we're trying to refine it to what does this committee need to address necessity? Do we have the information that we need? What questions do we still have? And what are our next steps? So I did, before I started this fun overview or repeat with Mr. Franzella's fine presentation, I did see a hand go up. Ms. Molina, do you still have a comment? It's yours.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Salazar, my question may have been addressed at the first meeting, March 30th, which I did not attend, but I did watch the playback on YouTube, and it was a lot of information. And here, as a representative of the public, I am not a CPA, and so a lot of this information is I'm grasping for the first time. My question has to do as sort of a bird's eye view of this whole topic. I know the task force is considering whether it is necessary to continue with the attest experience requirements. And I would like to understand if it were not required, if the argument goes as it's not required, then what is the alternative? I don't quite understand. If attest experience is not being required, then what does that mean? How do people, how do licensees then become able to do attest engagements? And then another question along that, since we did speak quite a bit about what other states are doing, are there other jurisdictions that don't require attest experience hours and such in order to be able to do this type of work?
Okay. And thank you for that question. And these are important questions, right? So if anyone in this room has it, this is why there's a variety of stakeholders together. There are many people asking that exact same question because this is a lot to cover. So I'm going to ask Mr. Franzella to respond and note that we have a question from Ms. Johnson, so we will follow up after the response. Mr. Franzella?
So I'll answer the first part of your question about what would happen if we eliminate it. It would be consistent with what the Uniform Accountancy Act and the vast majority of other jurisdictions presently perform, which is just requiring 1 year of general accounting experience. And that experience can be made up from accounting, attest, financial planning, tax. There's a list of things, but it doesn't require that they perform any and all of those areas, just some amount of hours for 1 year within the general accounting experience requirement. And then upon receiving licensure, they would be provided the opportunity to perform the full scope of services that a license affords them, which would be including signing reports on attest engagements. That particular practice is consistent with, I would say all, but I think it was about 3 or 4 states, or 2 states maybe, from the last polling questions that we had. The vast majority of states follow the UAA, which is a 1 year general accounting experience requirement. And upon receiving that license, you're authorized to perform the full scope of services, including the attest function.
Thank you for that. I believe that addresses both of the questions. And there is a follow-up in the room. Is it a follow-up, Mr. Dustin?
Yeah, it's more a comment than anything. Dominic, I just want to clarify that they can perform the full scope of services, but they are also restricted by the competency or the professional competency they have to perform those services. So if I'm an individual who gets licensed and I'm practicing tax, if I decide I have to do an audit, then professional standards would require me to have that professional competency before I could do that work. So it's not just I can go out and do it. I have to do something else to gain that competency.
Okay. And we might come back to that. That's an important comment. And so I'm going to kind of let that one marinate for a little bit. And then I would like to call on Ms. Johnson, and I'd like to ask our solid coordinator to please elevate her so she can participate.
Ms. Johnson, please proceed.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to confirm several of the comments that was just discussed. I was originally licensed in Texas, and during that time, and I also just checked their website, what Dominique shared with us in terms of the requirements for me to actually be licensed in Texas was the 1 year. And the way Texas described it as non-routine accounting work experience. And then I was able to get my California license through reciprocity. And I, had to go through all of the requirements. But even though I was licensed in Texas, in order for me to be able to perform any attest functions, I would have to demonstrate proficiency and ability to do that. And I never practiced in functions at all because I did not have the attest experience, and that was always my understanding. I don't know what Texas would consider to be the appropriate experience at this time, or the number of attestation hours they would require that would be considered the appropriate experience. But I just wanted to share that I concur with the comments that was just made regarding the alternatives.
Just listening to, thank you, Ms. Johnson, for that response. There was a small portion that was slightly garbled, but I think the core of that came through. It was just a few blips. Do we need any of that repeated for the record? Are we good? I'm looking at, I think we're great. Well, thank you for that. I would just want to make sure that everything is being captured by the folks following us online. So I think that is a very helpful comment. Other comments and questions? Ms. Hines?
So I was trying to go back and just remember why we were questioning the necessity, what motivated us questioning the necessity requirement. I mean, was this part of a periodic sort of evaluation, or was it, called into question? I'm going back through my notes and trying to figure that out, just as a reminder.
Mr. Franzella, would you like to tackle that?
Well, it's not calendared as periodic. It seems to happen periodically, whether or not it's the board or one of the committees or a task force such as this. What has occurred, and some of the genesis of this was over the past several years now, primarily in the enforcement division, but also in licensing, there's become some policy issues, concerns, questions on how to enforce certain areas of the Act, how to implement certain areas of our Practice Act as it relates to the two licensure type, while also ensuring the consumer protection component, barriers to licensure, and so on. And so at the November board meeting, and then again at the March meeting, staff highlighted about 3 primary concerns that were policy issues that have manifested as a result of the two licensure issue. One being, again, individuals are issued a general or a test license, firms are not. Firms are authorized to perform a full scope of services based on who can sign reports within the firm's structure. And we have a number of firms who are solely licensed by G-licensed individuals who are the owners, operators, and the primary responsible party for their firm's operations, but aren't authorized to sign the test reports and have staff members who sign those reports. And is that a problem? How does that function within the enforcement environment? It is allowable, and the board has contemplated and done incremental steps on addressing it, but there needs to be a more comprehensive approach to it if it were to stay in place. One of the other factors was also the reciprocal license that we had briefly talked about under Ms. Salazar's question. Again, the way reciprocal license works now is that if you come from another state that authorizes you to perform attest services, then you can apply for the attest license here without meeting the 5095, the attest experience requirement. But that's kind of a newer policy in place than how that same code section was applied, say, 7, 8, 9 years ago, where a firm or where an individual would actually need to demonstrate either on that form or through submitting certain documents that they've been actively involved in the attest environment, that they can demonstrate a minimum of 500 hours in competency. And a lot of those individuals actually ended up before the QC to demonstrate some of those competencies when they were transferring their license or seeking a reciprocal license. And there was a third item in there as well. And I apologize if Michelle knows the third item because she pulled it up, that'd be great, because I'm blanking on it presently.
He's blanking on it because it's really mine. The issue right now are really licensees who are owners of accounting firms and are G licensees, and they want to obtain an attest license. And how might they go about gathering that supervised experience in order to make that license conversion?
So building on that part of it, it's just because they're now at the supervision needs to be active and oversight and authority over. And as a supervisor or as the owner of the firm, there's really nobody there at a level above you in order to sign off. So it's kind of created probably an inadvertent barrier with respect to where these individuals maybe thought their firm would go, where their practice was going to be heading early on, and now they want to perform certain attest functions as their business is expanded, and they're kind of in a position where they're not able to get that experience absent moonlighting potentially at another firm on top of the work they're doing at their own firm. So again, these have manifested over the last 20 plus years since the A&G license has come into play. And prior iterations and considerations by this board or the task force, Mr. Dustin was on the task force last time as well, was more kind of theoretical discussions in terms of the applicability. Now we actually have tangible issues that keep cropping up. So that's why we brought forward these examples to really kind of bring forth now these are tangible issues that really need to be addressed.
Ms. Hines?
So I'm asking these questions because, and that last part I think, is important, and there was no way for us to know the direction in which we would go, particularly given, what has happened over the last couple of years, where now people are able to, technology has allowed people to practice in, locations that aren't physically situated in the place where they're licensed, where there's, more mobility, not in the accounting sense, but in the, practical sense. There's more mobility for professionals to do work, and then I can see how the law hasn't necessarily caught up to the realities of where we are. That said, I'm hesitant to eliminate a protection of the public in order to accommodate the realities of, the profession, the direction that the profession has moved into. I'm not, the rates at which these firms licensees have been, being disciplined or have been found to be deficient or have, had to, engage in remediation efforts to, acquire the, to be found to be competent and qualified to, provide this attestation experience. It seems pretty consistent. Like, it doesn't seem as though there, have been real, differences except for that one blip of when we changed it and, sort of the firms were catching up. It seems to be pretty consistent, we're catching issues, we're, helping licensees to address those issues where there are issues that can be, modified. And then, we're trying to, stop those individuals who are not qualified from, the public from having, from the public from knowing. I mean, we're trying to create an environment in which the public can, reasonably find these licensees that have the experience and the qualifications to be able to provide these services, and they can rest assured, you know, with confidence that they are engaging professionals who are adequately qualified to provide those services. I'm just not seeing anything that really supports the notion of, and I'm going out on, I'm putting us out on a limb. I'm going to make an opinion and let's talk about it. I'm not seeing anything that really undermines this necessity requirement. And, you know, and if our default is, you know, to continue with the status quo, you know, if that's sort of where, you know, we're leaning towards, you know, I need to see something that would, you know, really change my mind, or, you know, and make me, you know, question or consider why we might, you know, do this a different way. And what it seems that we would need to do is potentially evaluate really how do we address the realities of where the profession is and what kinds of ways do we need to make regulations to allow licensees to get the kind of experience that they need, or to be able to prove that they have the qualifications to be able to provide these, to get this kind of license. So it may be that the license just needs to be, maybe we need to look at what qualifies an individual, what you can evaluate, you know, and qualifies an individual to be able to become experienced. Maybe we need to codify the underlying expectation that someone would not try to perform in a test unless they had that experience, like, you know, Mr. Dustin was, you know, suggesting, like, you know, we assume that someone wouldn't try to do something that they don't already have the experience to do, but maybe we need to codify that, right, you know, or put it in a regulation as opposed to putting the expectation on them and then waiting until something happens to then say, oh, you shouldn't have engaged in this, you didn't have the experience. It just doesn't feel like addressing that problem that the licensees have to getting that attestation, you know, certification or approval. It doesn't feel like the way to address that is by, you know, compromising this very important, you know, public protective mechanism, you know, this attestation licensing, you know, to me.
So with that, I say thank you. We had lots of hands. I'm going to take the chair's prerogative and respond in part, and then maybe pose a question, and then we need to kind of move through. I think it's, you know, your points are really important, and I think that's why we didn't lead with the answers to the questions that the staff raised last. I think that's the context for how it, part of the reason it's bubbled up to a task force. And then I'll just share anecdotally from meetings that I'm able to participate in with NASBA and other CPAs and just outside of the course of this, that it does tend to bubble up periodically. And so we are, you know, maybe not the only state kicking the tires, and experience is an issue every time a new mutual recognition agreement with another nation is being discussed. And so, you know, these conversations are recurring, and I think it's probably part of our professional inquiry nature that we like to periodically make sure what we're doing makes sense. So I do just want to maybe respond to that. I don't feel that we're being asked to respond based upon a need to solve a problem. So I view it as we have a question in front of us of necessity, and there is is it necessary? And we've got some paths in front of us. If it is no, it leads us to a different set of questions. If it is yes, we need to continue that a test, then it becomes, is that number now sufficient? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? And then, depending on that answer, then we address implementation issues and policy issues that the staff need or have asked for some input from the board on. So again, I just think sort of the step-by-step approach is maybe the easiest way to tackle it. And you mentioned something that I had sort of my questions to ask, which I love. So my brain was headed the same way that Mr. Dustin in your comments took us, is that we do have a code of conduct which addresses some of these underlying issues. So due care, competence, and diligence are part of the obligation CPAs already have in order to provide services. And so we may end up talking about the hours for a test experience requirement and how it relates to that professional obligation. But my ask for staff with regards to this is to kind of tease out some of what was referred to in this meeting and possibly include in materials in the next meeting the relevant AICPA code of conduct and how that code is being captured within the CBA rules and regulations. And so that maybe would be my ask for staff, is to bring some clarity on how that element of professional standards applies to our licensees, both in California and everywhere within the U.S. that is performing. So that was a lot in response. I thank you. And then I know we have a lot of other questions. I don't know who is next, Mr. Smithian.
I appreciate those comments with regard to, the necessity. And I think from, I teach an auditing class. I know there's some other educators on here as well. And I would say with regard to, the professional standards and the importance of the code of conduct, a lot of what you described, the codification of that, is an important element of that educational piece. So it is something ingrained in the CPA mindset. And but getting back to the necessity of this, I think anytime, I guess two underlying issues. I think one, anytime there's a variation, and I think a fairly significant variation from practice from other jurisdictions, I think it's appropriate to ask the questions and say what is it that might be unique or different about the practice of public accounting here that warrants that type of change. And although there isn't a fiscal analysis, I presume everything we heard today from staff in terms of administering that and going through that there's a cost associated with that, and there are resources dedicated. And I just wonder if those resources could be better put in place to address ultimately what is in the best interest of the consumers, which is, the safeguards that really improve the overall audit quality. And I would just say, as someone who practiced for 33 years in public accounting, I think it's there, but I don't know if it's a substantive protection. And in terms of the consumer, I think there are other safeguards that we've heard from today, from peer review and other things, and we haven't spent a lot of time talking about continuing education, but other things that I think are in place that would provide those safeguards. And I think there are some fixes and other things that need to be addressed. I just don't think the 500 hours of the test is a real substantive protection of the consumer. And I'd like to see that attention and effort addressed in some other areas.
All right. Thank you for that comment. I apologize for the administrative work that was needed up here. I know we had some hands going up. Do I have any other comments? We have Ms. Corrigan.
Yes, thank you, Chair Salazar. I echo everything about code of conduct. That's what I practice as a CPA by. That's been in place for many, many years, gets refined over time. And to address the comment of Ms. Hines, while we would like to shore up as much as we can, nothing will ever be perfect. We know that. That's why we have other remedies in place. That's why we have enforcement and discipline. So no matter what we do, we'll have some error rate, unfortunately. And it is important to always look kind of at what others are doing, because we aren't just us alone. It affects an awful lot. It's important to know. We do talk at our NASBA board meetings and breakout sessions and that with other states, about these topics and mobility and how the changes in our environment the last couple of years has affected all of that. And it's important to know what, NASBA or AICPA and their Uniform Accountancy Act, what are they doing, or, what have they been doing? I mean, they continually look at things just like we do. And so it would be important to know some of that. But in my mind, I'm not ready to say we don't need a test experience. I'd like to really get far enough to, to determine, do we not need it, and how those other states have decided they don't, to help me make my decision. But I think we have made a list of items for staff to come back to us today, just in this conversation. So I would be hesitant to even suggest today that it isn't necessary, So yes, right now it is necessary because that's what we have in regulation, and I'm wrestling with these things and what is best. We didn't have peer review mandatorily in place until 2010, I guess it is. So yes, that does a lot, but does it really shore up the other things that we're concerned about? Peer review does review, a firm, its systems, and the education it requires to its licensees or its candidates for licensing, but it still doesn't deal with initially, that initial experience and whether that experience is necessary. Peer review comes after, when engagements are performed. And anyway, so I think everything that we're talking about today and looking at the code of conduct, that sort of thing, is very important for those non-CPAs that don't know what we practice by. They need to know all of this to help all of us make a decision. Thank you.
And so I hear that comment, and I can't resist throwing one in. As chair, I will say I don't expect this committee to arrive at a decision today. I feel it's important that this dialogue plays out so that we're getting our input and we're being thoughtful and considered and measured. And so I just want to make sure the committee members don't feel that pressure. And the goal is to determine really what information we need. And so just a couple things. We've got Mr. Centini with a question, and we've got Ms. Johnson with a question. We've talked about professional standards and the UAA CPA code of conduct. And so, staff, it is related to what we're talking about. So that is something, if staff wants to make a comment on that, would be welcome as well. I know you don't have to, that may be best deferred for a future meeting, but I didn't want to intentionally omit you from that conversation. And so I will just let that sort of sit, and then let's move along to the next comment, which is Mr. David Centini. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, thank you, Chair Salazar. I just wanted to make an observation and follow on several comments that have already been made. The CPA exam is changing in just a couple of years, and looking at the new CPA exam model, there still is only one class out of all of these classes that, in order to become to pass the CPA exam, there's not additional auditing. There's lots of additional economics, IT, especially technology. But where do the students get an additional audit class? They're lucky if they get 2 classes. So where else do people learn how to do auditing? And following the European model, for example, this is something that you should learn in an apprenticeship kind of way. This is something you should learn from somebody else. And it should take a long time, as in Europe, several years doing audits in order to become licensed and do audits on your own. So I just see and of course I'm an old guy, but I think that this doing audits as opposed to IT consulting or tax or anything else, considering the importance of audit in the economy today and the condition of the economy, I think that this is something that should be hard and should take a long time to sign audit reports, and it should be a meaningful and important thing as it is. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Ms. Johnson has been waiting very patiently, and so I'd like to acknowledge that Ms. Luz Molina will follow, but ask our WebEx coordinator to assist with Ms. Johnson's question or comment.
Ms. Johnson, please proceed.
Thank you. First, I just want to say I echo the comments made by Mr. Submidian, but I would also want us to keep in mind as we as we discuss the impacts of potentially changing what we have now, the confusion that's in the marketplace for the public today. With both people see it, many members of the public see a G license and an A license. And many members of the public that I have run into are extremely confused by that. And so just wanted to make sure that we are keeping that top of mind for whichever direction or potential solutions that we come up with.
All right, thank you for that comment, Ms. Luz Molina-Lopez.
Thank you, Ms. Salazar. Following up on Mr. Centini's comment regarding the amount of time it takes to gather this information or this experience, I would like to understand how long does it take for a CPA to gather the 500 hours of experience? And then in our reading materials, I think there's one other jurisdiction that requires 1,000 hours. Can you help me frame in my mind what does that equate to as far as how long does it take? I think you mentioned in Europe it takes a couple of years. I don't think it takes a couple of years here to gather those 500 hours. Can you help me understand?
Would you like to respond, Mr. Centini?
Well, I think anybody can, 500 hours, working 40 hours a week could be as little as just a few months. Which to me doesn't seem like enough, but.
And I sense we're moving into a sufficiency question and we're wandering away from a necessity question. But I mean, these are really important and speak to why this is such an important topic and is so discussed. Okay, we've got a lot of hands. We've got Ms. Farrell-Hines and we've got Ms. Corrigan.
So I went back and looked at our essential question, and a couple of times we've been talking about the quantity of hours and sort of questioning it. And the essential question does not suggest that we should look at the specific elements of the requirement. It's asking us whether the attest experience requirement as a whole is necessary and sufficient. And then we can talk about whether the different elements of necessary or sufficient are adequate. But the question really being asked is, is this separation of these licenses, categories still, does it continue to be necessary and sufficient? And if we determine that they are either not necessary or sufficient, then we have a discussion about, well, how do we define necessity and how do we define sufficiency? So it's a little bit of us getting into a tangential discussion to talk about, should it be 500 hours, should it be 1,000 hours? Because if we decide that we no longer need an attestation experience requirement, we don't ever have to have that conversation about quantity, and then the quality of that quantity. So, we do have limited time, and, so, I mean, I'm not hearing us questioning the necessity and sufficiency requirement of the attestation experience, or, having us really call that into question yet. I hear us talking more about the, subsections of those two, issues. And, so bringing it back, or, the one question, though, that I think Ms. Johnson raised, which we should address, is the public's confusion about these two licensing categories. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we should no longer have a separate requirement. It just means that the CBA has an obligation to do a better job of communicating to the public why these two licensing categories exist and how they benefit them, but, again, I'm not hearing, an evidence to undermine the necessity or sufficiency of the attestation experience requirement. And if there is more evidence that I'm missing, I just want to make sure that I'm reading it the right way.
So I'm going to pause. Staff has definitely heard the question about clarification and confusion, and that I think is being set aside while we address necessity. We had another comment, and I actually will put myself in line for comment because I have a different approach. And I still have some things, so we don't have a lot of time. So let's move along and try to do what we can to be brief.
Yeah, just very quickly to actually complete a response to Ms. Melina Lopez's question. Yes, the 500 hours can be obtained in a few months' time if you are with a firm that can provide it. Smaller firms may not be able to, and it may take a year or two. It depends on the experience available to you, which is another one of the questions everybody has about how do we achieve this? How do we do that? So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there so that it's clear. Thank you.
And thank you for clarifying. And so in response to Ms. Farrell-Hines' comments, I look at the necessity question kind of in the reverse. I love the audit requirement. I think we don't have enough hours. But I actually think we have to prove necessity the other way, as though we have to defend our need. And my burning question or overarching question is, I'm hearing that nationally we're kind of an outlier. We just are, right? We have a two-tier system. I believe we're the only one. My question is, how are all the other jurisdictions successfully licensing, disciplining, and protecting the public in their state? And what makes it necessary for California to be different? So I have some corollary questions for staff that might be future meeting materials. We already talked about some clarity about the UAA, which is that underlying professional code that everyone is responsible to comply with. You know, I think we may have asked this, can we get a little bit more detail around the number of licensees nationally licensed that are under the attest? So it's kind of fleshing out the question of who are the other states in the yes category of requiring attest experience requirements. Because again, I'm looking for some data. I believe that the vast majority of licensees practicing and performing don't have an attest experience, and yet they're still meeting standards. So that data might be helpful. And then when I think about why are the hours necessary in California but not elsewhere, then I kind of go, well, is our disciplinary process too slow? So I don't think the answer is no. I look at our licensing activity report that we'll review at the board meeting, and I see that 77% of our disciplinary cases close within 6 months, and 98% at a year. So it feels effective, but my question is there a way to get some statistics about how we compare with other states and speed of discipline? So again, if it's taking us significantly longer than everyone else, maybe we really do need a higher hurdle at the front end, because what is in place afterwards may take a little bit longer. So again, a consumer protection question. And then I have to ask, if we had more disciplinary cases, could our enforcement team manage them? So, you know, necessity to me is, if something changed, would we still protect consumers? And I know that's a bit of a loaded question. So, you know, again, I'm looking for reasons why it's necessary. How do we defend creating a completely different system than almost every other jurisdiction, and how do we bolster that necessity? How do we document that? So I don't expect an answer, but I think we've asked for some things, and we haven't yet asked for opinions from the committees like the QC committee, and those are of course options that this committee could ask for as well. So I've thrown a whole bunch out there. I am, you know, very undecided on this, and look forward to more information. But Ms. Corrigan?
Certainly, I agree with all of that, and that's the dilemma with this. And I'm assuming that staff noted these items you've mentioned and others that came up and that we're assigning them. So, for example, hearing from the QC and their thoughts based on what they're seeing live about necessity and sufficiency of the hours. Also, I think a question came up during the PROC chair presentation about what makes up a substandard review. I mean, what really makes up? We can see a table of numbers in that, and then of course when Mr. DeLizer went into an explanation, there's really some depth as to what some of those items mean as far as being substandard. So anyway, I just want to make sure we do have a complete list of everything that we're going to be coming back with to help us with our decision. Thank you.
Have other requests for information, or does staff have questions about those very vague requests that you now have to somehow try to manage? And I guess what I would say with my request, I'm hoping that the data is available. And if it's not already available, you know, from some of our past research on mobility or substantial equivalency, then, you know, I guess I would just ask for anecdotal or directional input from staff. My intent is just to get input, not to create brand new research projects. So I'm happy to work offline for any clarifying between meetings that staff may have. Mr. Francella, Ms. Bowers.
I'll actually respond to this. So we have multiple staff, including ourselves, capturing every action item or every request out of the meeting. So we'll have a debrief after the meeting, and I have no doubt we'll have a very comprehensive list. If in looking at any of those requests, it seems necessary to seek chair input in order to determine whether we should fulfill that request, I will certainly do that, but I anticipate we have the resources to do that. But I would like to go back and make one comment on your question regarding the enforcement staffing and whether or not if we had additional enforcement matters, would we have sufficient staff to support that? And we always do the opposite. We staff the enforcement division based on the workload that we have. And so if at any time there isn't sufficient resources in our enforcement program, that's our priority, and then we would act accordingly, whether that meant to seek additional staff or in the immediate to redirect internal staff to fulfill that need. So.
And thank you for that. And I appreciate how you manage the workflow and the staff that is doing it. So, you know, what I'm hearing, I'm going to take an attempt to do a recap. I think we've got a wide range of opinions. We still need some information. We have quite a bit that we have asked for. And so it seems that we can table the discussion and for the next meeting to wait to get some more input and hopefully continue this conversation at a future date. So at this point, so there is not a call for a motion or a vote, but I do want to take last comments, and also, of course, we have to take public comments. So I do see a hand here, Ms. Farrell-Hines. The floor is yours. Oh, Ms. Hines, thank you.
I'm going to ask if we can refine that follow-up a little bit more to say, like, I would like to hear from staff in reviewing what we've discussed and an interpretation of our direction, so that at the next meeting we do have a more, you know, targeted question that we are addressing. If after reviewing all of this, you're hearing like we may be inclined to keep it, then provide us with you're interpreting everything that happened. You think we're inclined to keep it, and then let us argue that, or we're inclined to eliminate it, and these are the ways in which we're going to eliminate it. Because I do think we've had enough of a discussion for us to start making some decisions, and there is a risk that we could keep just having this philosophical discussion and not. I'd like us to be put to kind of task by the next meeting to make a decision.
Ms. Bowers? I'll jump in and take that. I actually don't know that staff would really be in a position, and I don't want to cut staff off, but I wouldn't be in a position just based on these two meetings to draw a conclusion where the task force is going. So I think that would be a very difficult ask. I think we can capture comments and statements that the members have made and bring that back, and then the task force could draw that conclusion, but that would be a difficult ask for staff at this point.
And I also think, I'll just throw, we've asked for input from committees, and so that could be significant to have and could inform the conversation. But I hear the core of your point, which is let's stay focused, let's focus on necessity, let's make sure this isn't, you know, a perennial type of committee, and focus upon resolution. And so I think that is definitely well received, and I appreciate that. So we will work with staff to that goal. And with that, final comments from committee members. Mr. Smithian.
I just want to go back to, I think it was in item 8, there was a question about whether firms have distinct authority. And I'm not, at the time I wasn't sure, I still am not sure what that meant, but if we can look at whether or not there's something that can be addressed, I guess at the firm level, including sole practitioners as opposed to the individual licensee that might address some of the concerns. I guess that would be, part of a question, but if there's an additional piece of input, because what I surmise is that other firms have identified either backstops or other types of safeguards. And to the extent we do not have that equivalent, I think that would be information that we in California don't have the equivalent. It would be helpful to know what those are. I suspect we have some of those same things, but I may be wrong. But I think if there are those items there, and then maybe that's what distinct authority talks to.
Okay.
Or maybe I confused two different things.
Well, I just want to make, sorry.
I was going to say, it is confusing, and we do talk about some of those in the material. So maybe we can re-highlight those segments at the next meeting and kind of flesh some of that out. Mr. Franzella?
Yeah, I was just going to maybe seek a little clarification, because some of what you're asking for appears to be towards a recommendation towards like what would be a backstop if we eliminated the attest experience requirement. So that is something we have tabbed, just like the consumer confusion. There's a handful of other items we have slotted in place based on final recommendations or an initial recommendation from this committee that staff are going to be prepared to bring up. And so that was one of them. It wasn't something we were prepared to bring necessarily until such time as there was this decision like, okay, if we're going to eliminate a test, here's a potential backstop that the legislature, because again, the legislature, while the board is going to be the one who wants to make this recommendation and may go forward making this recommendation, ultimately, just to be clear, it's the legislature is going to make the determination of whether or not even the board's policy will be implemented, and the board will need to provide sufficient rationale, basis, and potentially something like a backstop for the firms. And I know, again, and Mr. Dustin and I spoke about this offline a little bit, the idea of this maybe a test firm kind of idea that the UAA may be going down, but that's much further into the future on those types of discussions. So we can bring that back to the next meeting, but again, it's definitely more geared towards the idea of the elimination as opposed to where the discussion is on necessity.
Thank you, and agreed. It's all at the moment about how do we conclude on necessity first, but that's an important follow-up comment. So with that, I believe that concludes our member comments for this meeting. I'm sensing we definitely have a to be continued here. And we do, of course, have to open for public comment. And so we do have an individual who has stepped forward here in Sacramento. So I would like to welcome Mr. Jason Fox and invite comment.
Jason Fox, California Society of CPAs. I was wrestling whether I should comment or not, but I think this is a healthy conversation. I think it's an important conversation, and the implications of this are significant. So I think it's important to really spend some time. I just wanted a couple comments. I think Ms. Salazar's approach is a good way to explore this question and why should California be different and whether this is appropriate and determine the necessity. And I think it's also important to keep a context of this is one part of a broader licensure framework and one part of a broader regulatory framework. And so, there's a test component and safeguards and backstops kind of built in through all that piece. And so, the experience piece is certainly important, but it's not the only thing. Final comment, the licensure is a kind of a minimum level of competency enters in the profession. So, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be a partner in a Big Four accounting firm, but you're entered into the profession. So just a couple comments there. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your public comment. I am looking around the room, and that concludes the public comment in Sacramento. Of course, we still have our WebEx population, so I would like to invite our solid moderator to please open up the WebEx for public comment. And we are on item number 11, discussion regarding possible recommendations for the experience requirement.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen. Members of the public via WebEx, if you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of a square, type comment in the text field and send it to all panelists. If you prefer, you can raise your hand by clicking the hand icon next to your name. And if you have called in, you can press *3 to raise your hand. I do not see any raised hands or any requests via Q&A. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, moderator, please close Q&A. And with that, we move on to the final agenda item, which is 12, agenda items for future consideration at CERT meetings. Are there any additional agenda items that were not brought up in our last discussion point from the members of our committee? And seeing none, I now open that for public comment. In Sacramento, do we have any public comment on future agenda items? And seeing none, I'd like to invite our solid moderator to open up the WebEx portion of the meeting for public comment on our final agenda item, number 12.
Yes, the Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen. If you would like to participate, you can click that question mark, type comment, click send to all panelists. You can raise your hand or press *3. No raised hands, no requests via Q&A. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, moderator, please close that Q&A for us. And before we adjourn the meeting, I would like to thank the committee members who have traveled, who have participated online. I think the variety of stakeholders here is critical and important, and I really want to say publicly that I just value all of your comments and thoughtfulness as we engage in this issue. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for a productive meeting, and this meeting is now adjourned at 12:08.